Hi, this is Jim Cranston from 7 Every Minute and 7everyminute.com, the podcast and website about reimagining your life. Thanks for joining me today to talk about exceeding your limits. So let's get started. If you like what you hear today, please leave a like, tell your friends, and send me a message. Tonight's all about exceeding all the limits in our lives. But first, we have to take a moment to wish everyone in the U.S. and everyone everywhere, quite frankly, a wonderful Thanksgiving. In the U.S., it's this coming Thursday, and our friends in Canada celebrate it in October. And I know it's not an official holiday in many countries, and that always struck me as kind of odd and kind of a little bit, kind of too bad. Because, I mean, if there's any day worth celebrating, it seems having a day to appreciate what you do have is a really good use of a holiday. But to the topic at hand, exceeding limits. It was Henry Ford who once said, whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right. Far more than just a witty phrase, it really captures the essence of setting and exceeding the limits we place upon ourselves. How many women and girls do you know that said they can't do math because they're a girl? Many, right? How many famous women mathematicians are women? Again, many of them, some of the most famous ones in the world. So the first group was clearly mistaken, but for whatever reason, they placed this limiting belief into their belief system, and so it became true. This isn't gender specific. We all do it in many different ways to ourselves, but that one always struck me because there's so many awesome role models, and yet still this incorrect negative belief still persists. But what about beliefs that society places in our lives? These are particularly insidious because society itself is confirming them to us all the time. So it's really difficult to see past them. These can be lifestyle. You have to dress nicely and have a new car, or else, well, you just really aren't one of the cool people. Ever notice how there are a lot of ads saying cool people don't have car payments? I'm sorry, I missed an important word, that there are not a lot of ads saying that cool people don't have car payments and do have money in the bank and can retire at 45 or 50 years old, right? That would be a far better role model. But that isn't the message that society is always sending us. And the businesses that fuel it, of course, because they want to get across that we're always relentlessly hounded to spend money on things. The limiting belief here is that to fit in, you need new things. But there are again endless examples to the contrary that just seem to be ignored. If you take Warren Buffett, for example, he was formerly the richest person in the entire world. He still lives in the same house in Nebraska that he bought since 1958, actually. So one of the quandaries then is, why is it that we ignore the good role models who are setting huge goals with almost no limits and instead pigeonholing ourselves into such limiting beliefs? Oftentimes it stems from beliefs instilled in us as children or through folklore and common knowledge, especially with respect to money and our place in society. Money is often held up as a grand example of kind of evil incarnate. Actually, money itself is evil. Rich people don't care about poor people. Money always corrupts. I mean, everything about money is often said to be evil. Yet the reality is, more often than not, money just makes people to be kind of more of what they were before they had money. If you look at the lottery winners, that's very, very clear. People who are generous give it all away. People who are not still aren't. I mean, people who weren't good with money, they get $100 million and it's gone in 2 years. It's kind of like, you really have to work pretty hard to do that. But there are lots of examples around, and it's it shouldn't be difficult to find people who are good role models and people who inspire us. But for some reason, they never seem to turn up in the popular media. But let's take Warren Buffett again. Most of his biggest investments were in companies with tangible products, things that are actually made. So that meant they're creating jobs for people. So unlike an investment broker, and you can argue this both ways, I know, but I'm going to use it as an example, and somebody like an activist investor who gets more value for the shareholders, and there's a number of names that come to the front of my mind in this topic, but these people get more money for a limited group of people while they put many other people out of business. Warren Buffett built bigger and better companies, so more people had work, and they could, proudly get a job and provide for their families. How great is that? Oh, and we shouldn't forget that ultimately he gave away 51.5 billion, that's billion with a B, dollars to charity. Now, when you look at numbers like that, some of the other people who claim to be such magnanimous, generous people of the more recent nouveau riche, especially in the technology world, makes them seem a little bit miserly, right? I mean, they're setting up trust funds that they control, and it's a little different. Some people who are genuinely generous are generous whether they don't have a little money, have a little bit of money, have a lot of money. It's not the money that makes the difference. It's the character that makes the difference. And that is the important distinction we have to make when creating our own internal limits and our own goals. Many of our limiting beliefs come from common knowledge, which quite frankly is really created, it's a created narrative by society, and it's not reality whatsoever. What if instead of being told to spend ourselves into debt, we instead were told to model people who created wealth for themselves and use that to raise others up to a higher level? How much better would that be? That's also a very real story with many good examples, but it doesn't have an emotional grit that, popular folklore likes to focus on and make a story more interesting. Hearing somebody's a really good person, they made the town a lot better, and everybody liked them, it's kind of, yeah, that's really great. But, hearing how bad they were and everybody hated them and they put people out of business and everything, well, now that's a story you can sell in the paper, and that's really kind of one of the fundamental issues is to what news is today, and not just today, for a number of years. It's always based upon the sensationalist and not necessarily the reality. It's interesting, I use the word grit because there used to be a newspaper named Grit, Grit, which was nothing but good news. And, once modern times came, it used to be very popular. 80% of the circulation was outside in suburban areas and farm areas. But, in the modern, oh so cool world, it really didn't last very long. Check it out on Wikipedia, GRIT newspaper or magazine, and it'll turn right up. It's actually, it was around when I was a child, and it was pretty interesting. But, a little segue there. But so the first lesson, and a cautionary one, is that the first step in exceeding our limits may very well be looking at where our perceived limits came from and just removing those limits from our belief system. If you think money is bad, well, it's really hard to go try and get a better job because you think, oh, I don't want to be rich because rich people are bad. If you think money is just a tool, and a tool that allows you to do more of what you want to, and if what you want to do is help other people, then earning more money is just a tool to help you help more people. So how you set your mindset really determines how you view things in your belief system. This isn't always easy to do, but the reality is that things like social media and distributed chat groups, well, those allow us to find like-minded positive thinkers, just like we can find all the naysayers. Excuse me. There are many supportive groups online, just like there are all the negative groups that we all come across. They may not get the headlines and the promotion that the bad ones do for the same reason, positive headlines don't get the same the same promotion the negative headlines do, but they are out there. And if you do a little digging, you'll come across them. We've talked in the past about restarting our own community. We had one for a while back. And for those of us interested in creating our best selves with like-minded supporters, and we're working on that again. And I think there's a lot of merit to hanging around with other people. I can tell you, or other people with similar interests, I can tell you from my involvement with some of my mentors, that having a group to turn to who shares some important aspects of your belief system, it's really kind of a wonderful way to reinvigorate yourself. We know when the daily grind gets just a little bit old and everything seems wrong, and you go to these people and you describe your problem, and they say, well, what about yesterday? You did this, or, hey, how about this for a different way to approach it? And it's just nice to have like-minded people around. And so we're going to look into starting that up again. While the everyday world is busy telling you that, it's just hopeless to try or even to hope, you have this separate group of like-minded thinkers, and they're totally energized, and they understand your trials, and they're there to encourage you and support you. And it's really important that this isn't hiding from reality. It's not saying, oh, I'm sitting with a bunch of people and they're going to tell me really good things so that way I don't have to really look at my bad state at all. That's not true. This is rediscovering the reality and energy that living without artificial limits can bring back into your life. But what about limits that seem to be physically based? Whether they're hereditary limitations, like your height or something like that, or physical issues or acquired limitations from things like aging, clearly you just can't think your way out of those, right? Well, you're only partly correct. Obviously, physical impairments are real, but how they affect us is somewhat under our control. In my time caring for my mother a number of years back, during her later years, she was wheelchair bound. And so I had the honor of meeting many other people, when we were out and stuff in wheelchairs and with other physical limitations. And frankly, they would put me to shame with all they accomplished despite their mobility challenges. I'll save you the details for another episode, but I'll suggest, you never say to such a motivated person, how difficult it is to get things done today, because then you hear what they got accomplished without any of your physical advantages, and it makes you realize the limitation isn't your age or your sore back or whatever it is. The limitation is your attitude and your own perception and perceived limitations. They aren't real. You've made them up. So I hope you're starting to see that many of our limitations are the result of learned behavior that frankly can be unlearned. Some of the learning is from family and close environment. Some of us from society and media as a whole. Some of us from what we learned in school, which is, of course, also affected by what society wants us to believe. But some of the most closely held beliefs arise from within ourselves. They may be in response to outside inputs, such as events at school or with peers, but often we take those and blow them up into huge events, when in reality it was something small. But when we didn't have an answer, we turned it into a limitation. It may have been our brain trying to keep us safe by saying that if we weren't able to do it, well, we didn't want to, or no one in our family could do that, so it wasn't our fault, or any other external reason, so we wouldn't have to feel like it was our fault. And while it worked okay in the moment, the issue with that is it becomes ingrained as us as a potentially lifelong limiting belief. I'll give you a real, honest to God, personal, real life case in point. My family is a third generation. We have third generation physicians. My father is one of my brothers is a physician. My father is a physician. My grandfather is a physician. And he was actually a physician when he learned to be a physician by actually going and practicing with somebody, and just like you would in the trades. It was kind of interesting. So there's a long history of physicians in my family. And I wanted to be a doctor, but I didn't think I could handle life and death responsibility. And so I thought about it, and I'd looked at medical schools, but then I went into engineering because I thought it was safer. And it turns out the life and death responsibility there, I used to design hazardous gas systems for what they call two-step gases. You wouldn't make it two steps if it leaked before you would be dead. But at the time I didn't realize that, so I picked a different career. And so now we fast forward 40 years, and after a couple of hurricanes disrupted all the emergency medical care in my area, I went out and became a wilderness first responder, and have indeed been an injured person's best option to survive, truly survive, like from not breathing to breathing again. So what changed? The realization from some excellent teachers at Solo Schools. Actually, I can't remember if I have that here or not. Solo Schools in Conway, New Hampshire. I thought I had that. There we are. Soloschools.com. Great people, and one of the things they are great at is changing your attitude and changing your mindset and giving you the self-confidence to go into difficult situations and realize that indeed you really are the best option for that individual's survival. And when you realize that, it's kind of like changes the whole thing. Like, wow, here I thought I wasn't the best person in the world, and maybe I'm not, but at the moment, I'm the best person that's here. I changed my focus from all the things that could go wrong to all the things that could go right. And it completely changed my attitude and removed a lifelong limitation. 40 years of a limiting belief destroyed and removed in a 2-week period. Essentially, nothing in me changed physically, or even really mentally insofar as capabilities. It was simply reprogramming my brain with a new reality and seeing my life, in a different way. We're all built with the ability to exceed any and all limits that we need in order to live our life to the fullest potential. You should not ever lose sight of that amazing power and ability to grow in ways you can't imagine until you can imagine them, and then you should take full advantage of them. So that's it for tonight. I hope you enjoyed thinking about exceeding every possible limit that you desire, and now realize that many of them are really limits that we, often with the help of those around us, created for ourselves. More importantly, though, is that since we created them, we can remove them and live in our lives and live our own lives in ways that we didn't think were ever possible. This isn't about making believe, setting goals that, that just can't possibly happen. I want to be a billionaire by tomorrow. But this is really about setting goals to match our potential, irrespective of perceived limits, and then finding a path to remove those limits and living the life that we know we're capable of. Your homework, optional of course, is to think about something you just know that you can't do or achieve. Now write down some reasons it can't be done. make it a stretch goal, not something, silly. Like I said, don't become a billionaire by tomorrow, but something, something that's plausible, but something that's not trivial to do. And, and think about all those things that, you've told yourself why you couldn't possibly do it. Now for the extra points. If you take a couple of those reasons and say, how could I do this if I knew I couldn't fail? Remember that. We've talked about this before. A lot of times if you're trying to do something, the first thing your brain does to keep it safe is say, well, this could happen, that could happen. Just say, okay, we're going to shut that off for a minute. How would I approach this? How would I do this? What would I try and do if I knew that I could not fail? And write down what you would do. You don't have to do anything else. That's the end of that part of the extra points for the homework. But your mind will start working on getting you to where you want to be. And before you expect it, you'll see a path clear to the goals that before you thought were completely unobtainable. That's it for the evening. As always, ukr7.com, link to AIDS for Ukraine, and of course, wck.org. WCK, World Central Kitchens, they do humanitarian food for places, usually not war zones, but they have been in war zones more recently, but where their big thing is they try and use food that's available locally. This isn't some support your local farmer thing, but it's really because a lot of times when there's a disaster, a lot of the infrastructure is damaged. And so if a hurricane came through, if there is a war, or earthquakes or something, it's not like you call up the local warehouse and have food shipped in. And so they're really experts at taking food that's available there already and getting it out, distributed, and ways to prepare it so that it's available to be ready nutrition for the people that are close. WCK.org. Can't speak of them too highly. And of course, UKR7, lots of links to Ukraine. So that's it for the evening. Please remember, of course, the war in Ukraine and all the wars that are going on everywhere. There's a lot of suffering in the world. And it's particularly appropriate right now since it's U.S. Thanksgiving, and I was talking about Thanksgiving earlier. We are extraordinarily fortunate here and in a number of places in the world. And it's not to say that everybody here has it perfect. That's not so. There are certainly people here who are deprived and suffering, and we want to help those people as well. And this isn't a help somebody else instead of ourselves, not at all. This is just try and be open-minded to helping people, period. Whether it's helping them with food during the Thanksgiving and Christmas holidays, whether it's helping them with donations to an organization that helps them, whether it's just helping them with a smile when you pass them on the street. See somebody look kind of a bad mood and start just looking at, oh, what's wrong with you? Just like I said, hey, how's it going? Just something pleasant. Just a little thing like that can turn somebody's day around. Remember, the more you can kind of think outside of yourself, it's changes your perspective on the world. It moves you from looking inward to outward and tends to make the world look like a brighter place. One of the best ways to care for yourself is to care for others. Always keep that in mind. So if you can and you're able, try and do something nice over the holidays, and then from then on out. As always, thank you for stopping by. If you found something interesting or useful, please pass it along, and please hit that like button. If not, please drop me a comment as to what you'd like to hear. Remember to live the life that you dreamed of, because that's the path to true contentment. Love and encouragement to everyone. See you next week in 7 Every Minute. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving, whether you're in the U.S. or anywhere, and just a wonderful time, no matter what. Thank you again.